Okay, you guys should have your 9-1, 9-2 notes opened up, and you should be looking down at example 3. Okay, so find that. It's on like the second page. Find example 3. Okay, all right, so what we're going to actually do today, instead of just looking at the picture and identifying parts, we're actually going to start sketching our own. Okay, and it's going to seem a little labor intensive and it's going to seem a little overwhelming at first. I just need you to stick with me and know that it does get easier the more and more we do. Okay. All right, so it's asking us in our directions to graph each function. Okay, remember function is just a fancy word for equation. Identify the axis of symmetry. We know that that's where it cuts the parabola in half. The vertex, so that would be your top point or your bottom point. Make a table, and then we're going to sketch it. And then after that, we're going to find the x-intercept, zero, roots, or solutions. Remember, those are all interchangeable, but basically we're going to figure out where does it cross the x-axis, okay? All right, so our 5 steps here. We are going to find the axis of symmetry. AOS is just short for axis of symmetry, okay? And you are going to use x equals negative b over 2a or divided by 2a, okay? All right, your next step, find the vertex. And to find the vertex, we're going to take whatever we get here and we're just going to plug it into the original equation. Okay, so step 1 and 2 are directly related. The problem's going to be if you mess up step 1, step 2 is way gone then at that point. All right, so you have to get step 1 right. Otherwise, that messes up everything from there on out. Okay, so we're going to find the vertex. Remember, that's the max or minimum point. And we're going to do that by taking this guy and plugging it into the equation. Then we're going to make a table. We're going to use 5 values, and I'm going to show you how to do that. We're then going to sketch those points on a grid. All right, and then our last step is we're going to find where does it actually cross. And remember, I can use all 4 of these words. They all mean the same thing. So it doesn't matter if I say x-intercept, root, 0, or solution. All right, so let's go over to the next page here. All right, so we're going to go ahead and start with our first problem here. All right, here, let's zoom in here. All right. So now if I look at this first one, okay, keep in mind f of x is the same thing as a y. So don't let that be confusing to you. Now in this problem, 5x squared, if you notice there's no b and there's no c here. So we have a equals 5, b going to be 0, and c is going to be 0 because we're missing both parts. Okay, so now when we do our axis of symmetry, okay, so we've got x equals negative b over 2a. So I've got x equals negative 0, so just 0, over 2 times 5. Well, 0 divided by anything is 0. So my axis of symmetry is x equals 0. So now for the vertex, I'm going to take this guy right here, and I'm just going to plug him back in, okay? Now, side note real quick. Axis of symmetry is an equation of a line. You have to have the x equals or you don't get full credit, okay? So this is a must. Okay, so now back to vertex. So we're going to take this and we're going to plug that back in up there. So I've got y, oh, I guess it's f of x, but f of x equals 5 times 0 squared. Okay, so all I did was take the 0 and plug it in right there. So 5 times 0 squared is just 0, okay? So my y value, f of x or y, is 0. So your coordinate point is going to be whatever your x value was. I plugged in a 0, and what did you get out? In this case, I got out a 0. Okay? So this guy right here, here's your answer for axis of symmetry. Here's your answer for vertex. Okay? All right, so now when we're making the table here, we've got to use that information that we just found. So I'm going to make a table. This is going to be my x. This is going to be my y. Now, you are going to take your vertex and we're going to put it in the middle. That's going to be our middle point, and then we're going to build off of it. So whatever your vertex is here, bring it down into the middle. So I'm going to put 0, 0 right there. All right, and we're going to build. So just go up and go down off of that. So I've got 1, 2, and then I'm going to go the other direction and do a -1, -2. Okay, so now to finish out my table, I'm just simply going to take and plug like 1 back into my original equation up there. So I'm going to have 5 times 1 squared. Okay, now think about order of operations. 1 squared is 1 times 5 is 5. So right here my answer is 5. Now we've talked that we know a parabola is symmetrical. So that means what I have on one side, I have on the other. So when I get an answer for 5 for the 1, up on the -1, I'm going to have a 5 there as well. All right, and then I go to the next one. 5 times 2 squared. Okay, so I'm going to take 2 squared is 4. 4 times 5 is 20. And we're going to put 20 there. And remember, it's symmetrical, so I put it on both sides. All right, so let's go ahead, go down here, and let's kind of figure out our graph. We'll fill in the solutions here in a little bit. All right, so on our graph, we have an axis of symmetry at 0. So that means my dotted line, or where it's going to cut the parabola in half, is going to go down 0. Okay, so now put your vertex. That was our second step. Our vertex was 0, 0. So I'm going to put my point there, 0, 0. And then remember, it's going to be symmetrical on both sides. Let's see, and to get to 20, I'm going to go ahead and count these by 2. All right, so I'm going to count by 2 here. I'm going to zoom in, and so 2, oops, 2, 4, 6, 8. Okay, now I'm going to go ahead and just leave my x's as a 1. So I've got 0, 0. When we plugged in the 1, I got 5. So 5 will be right about there between the 4 and the 6. And then remember, whatever I have on one side, you've got on the other. So go ahead and just transfer that point over. And then we're at 220. So way up here, we've got a point at 220. Remember, it's symmetrical on both sides, negative 220. And now I'm going to draw an arch. It's not a V. Draw an arch going up. Okay. All right, so now my solutions are going to be wherever it crosses the x-axis. So in this case, where's it crossing? Well, it's crossing at 0. So back up here, when it says solutions, our solution is 0. It's crossing at 0. Okay. All right, so let's go ahead and try another one here. Okay, so we're going to start with axis of symmetry again. So negative b over 2a. So now if I look here, a would be equal to 1. All right, there's a 1 in front. There's no x, so that means my b is still 0. And c this time is going to be 1. Okay, so axis of symmetry, right? Negative b over 2a. So x equals 0 divided by 2 times 1. And we know that that's just going to be 0. 0. I don't know what happened there. Okay, so now we're going to find the vertex. Okay, so we're going to take 0 and we're going to plug it in. So we've got y equals 0 squared plus 1. So y will just equal 1. So my coordinate point, x is 0. What did I plug in? And then what did I get out? Okay. All right, so now we're going to start our table. And remember, what our vertex is, that's what goes in the middle. So here's x, y, and we're going to do 0, 1. Okay, so now I'm going to plug in, I'm going to do 2 numbers on either side, keep them the same kind of distance apart. So since I'm at 0, I'm going to go 1, 2, and then negative 1, negative 2 again. All right, so 1 squared plus 1. Well, 1 squared is 1, plus 1 is 2. And then I'm going to have a 2 on the other side there. And then we're going to plug in the 2. 2 squared plus 1. Well, 2 squared is 4, plus 1 is 5. So I'm going to put a 5 on either side. Okay, and like I said, we'll come back to the solutions here in a minute. So I'm going to start, again, my axis symmetry in this case is right down the axis. And my vertex is 0, 1. And then let me look at my other points here real quick. We had 1, 2, and 2, 5. So 1, 2, 1, 2, and then put that on the other side. And then 2, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4. Here's 5 right there. Okay, so now it's going to come up. And so now when I'm looking at solutions, we're looking, where does it cross the x-axis? Well, in this case, it doesn't cross the x-axis. So that's going to be no solution, not 0. It's going to be actually be a no solution. Make sure you tell the difference. Okay? All right. Let's go ahead and we're going to turn over to the next page now. All right, so let's take a look at what happens when we've actually got all 3 parts now. Okay, so axis of symmetry is negative b over 2a again. All right, so remember, x equals negative b over 2a. So now here your a would be 1, b would be 6, and c would be 8. Okay, so negative b, so x equals negative 6 over 2 times 1. So negative 6 divided by 2 is negative 3. Okay, so there's my axis of symmetry. So now I'm going to plug that in. So now I be careful here when I plug in that negative, put parentheses around it. So I got negative 3 squared plus 6 times negative 3 plus 8. Okay, so again, now you can just type that straight into your calculator, which is what I'm doing right now. Just give me a second here. And we're going to end up with negative 1. All right, so y equals negative 1. So my coordinate point is negative 3, negative 1. All right, so now when we go to our table, and we make our table here, we're going to put our vertex in the middle. So I'm going to do negative 3, negative 1, okay? And then again, I'm going to build around it. So I've got like negative 2, negative 1 on one side, and then negative 4, negative 5 on the other side, okay? So I'm going to start by plugging in the negative 2. So I've got negative 2 squared plus 6 times negative 2 plus 8. And so I end up with 0. And so if I have a 0 there, I have a 0 on the other side. All right. Now we're going to do the same thing. So let's plug in negative 1. And so when I plug that in, I ended up with a 3. Okay. All right. So let's go down here. We'll do solutions here in just a second. So we've got an axis of symmetry at negative 3 this time. So I'm actually going to put my dotted line down negative 3. Okay, and then my vertex was negative 3, negative 1. So I've got a point right here. Okay, and then these guys were at 0. And then let me go back up. Let's see, when I plugged in negative 1, we got a 3 out. So then I'm crossing at 1, 2, 3. There we go. All right. All right. Oh, that wasn't very good. Let's try that one more time here. So get a nice curve going, not a V. Okay, and so now the question is, where does it cross the x-axis? Well, in this case, if I'm looking there, it's clearly crossing at negative 2 and then negative 4. Okay, so I'm going to go back up here, and my answers are going to be negative 2 and negative 4. That's where it's crossing. Okay, all right, we're going to go to D, and this is going to be our last example for today. Okay, one of the things on D I wanted to talk to you about is really be careful with this negative out front here. A lot of kiddos have a tendency to miss this because when they type it in their calculator, they don't put a negative 1 out front. Whoops, that's not what I was going for. Let's try that again. They don't put a negative 1 out front, okay? So when you're doing this, just be very cautious, and I would use actually negative 1x squared plus 2x minus 3, okay? Because when you put it in your calculator, a lot of kiddos miss that. All right, so x equals, for axis of symmetry, right, negative b over 2a. So I have x equals negative 2 over 2 times negative 1, right? So if you're thinking about this, a would be negative 1, b would be 2, and c would be negative 3, okay? So then negative 2 divided by negative 2 is 1. So my axis of symmetry, I'm going to put it down here and run out of room, will be 1. X equals 1. There's my axis of symmetry. Okay, so now my vertex, when I type this in, I'm going to put negative 1, and then I'm going to put 1 squared plus 2 times 1 minus 3. All right, so my answer was negative 2 when I did that. So my vertex is going to be, my vertex is going to be 1, negative 2. Okay, all right, so now let's set up our table. Okay, so I have 1, negative 2, so I'm going to have 0, let's put 0 on the other side. So we're going to have 0, negative 1, and then 2, 3. Okay, now I love 0. When any chance I get to plug in a 0, I do it, because it doesn't really matter. It's just going to be negative 1 times 0 squared plus 2 times 0. All that first stuff is always going to go to a 0, and so pretty much your answer is always just going to be whatever the C value is. So negative 3, negative 3. And then I'm going to plug in, I'm going to go ahead and plug in the 3 instead of the negative 1. So I get negative 1 times 3 squared plus 2 times 3 minus 3. And when I get that typed in my calculator, I end up with a negative 6. All right. So we'll come to our solutions here in a second. So we've got 1, -2. So my dotted line's down 1, -2, and then we had -3s. And then what else we have? Oh, we had -6s. So right here. All right, and so that's going to cross down. That's going to come down. Okay, so again, we're looking at our solution, and where do we see solution? Where does it cross? It doesn't cross, so then that would be a no solution. That's going to go ahead and conclude our notes for today for 9192, and